Lords and ladies, I greet you. We're going to be talking about Avowed again today because a fairly major bomb dropped with respect to Avowed, and something that none of us were really expecting. So a few days ago, it became known that large-scale YouTubers, the elect as it were offered the opportunity to play Avowed hands-on, so to speak, and they got to play roughly 8 to 10 hours in total. Now, the impressions have been, and this is the point to be made here, overwhelmingly positive for the most part. However, we should be honest here, this is a form of access journalism. Every one of these individuals who got early access to these previews is participating in access journalism, and there's always a risk there because it might color their views and their interpretations of things because, let's be honest, there's a reason why they keep on getting early access, because they generally offer favorable reviews, and that's just the way it is. So let's take it with a grain of salt, but let's at the same time run with it, because oddly enough, some of the things that people are the most concerned about seem to be either fixed or dramatically improved. I'm specifically talking about the combat here. In earlier iterations, people expressed a lot of concern about the combat. It looked kind of wonky, very clunky, uninteresting. But overwhelmingly, the people who reviewed the early footage here said that the combat feels good, especially the melee combat. It has a lot of oomph to it, so to speak. Using wands is super fun, apparently, as is using firearms such as the arquebus, and using magic appears to be super cool too. And this is a bit of a relief because my biggest concern about this game was the combat, because Obsidian isn't really known for their in-depth and super interesting combat, at least in first-person action games, and they seem to have nailed it here, at least according to the previews. It feels weighty, it feels fun, you can do a lot with it, and I'm pretty happy with that, because I like good combat as much as the next guy. The other thing that was quite interesting is the explorability and the relative size of everything, because the small snippet of a map that you have on offer in this preview appears to offer quite a bit. There's a ton of exploration, and there's a ton to discover as well. In fact, one of the reviewers' complaints was that there's so many hidden chests out there that it becomes a bit of a chore even to explore it all, because you're sort of driven to go into every nook and cranny to see what's there, which, to my mind, is not really a huge problem. It's, I guess, sort of a problem, but it doesn't bother me because the more goodies you can get, the better, in my humble opinion. And basically, the world feels pretty good. I've seen some of the dialogue, and there are some serious RPG mechanics here. You can convince people using your stats, you can do relatively evil, nasty things to people as well. So this is a proper RPG by all accounts, and the characters there seem to have real backgrounds. One of the instances I saw was a divorced couple, they're both blacksmiths, who are at each other's throats, and so when you arrive in town, they have this whole history, and they don't really like each other, and they will backstab each other, that sort of thing. So I think basically Avowed is shaping up to be quite good, even impressive considering the limited budget and scale. And on some level, even though it's access journalism, I think these previews are pretty important because no one save Morticimal Gaming has actual experience in the universe of Aora or the Pillars of Eternity universe. And for all of those people, the uninitiated as it were, to greenlight this and say, you know, this is actually pretty fun, it's pretty cool, I enjoy exploring, this sort of thing, indicates something good because ultimately what Obsidian needed to do was to attract the people that were not steeped in the world of Aora, not steeped in Pillars of Eternity, because for most of us, not everyone, because a lot of people don't want to make the transition to a first-person action game, so to speak, but for most of us, we want more Pillars of Eternity content, i.e. we'll take what we can get. But if you've never touched it, and you have no clue about the cosmology, the lore, the history, and you still find this fun, that's going to be the major hook factor for anybody, because it needs to feel fun in order to want to explore the world, in order to proceed with the story, and learn about the lore and history and this sort of thing. So, based on my impressions and the impressions of other people, Obsidian really seems to have nailed this aspect, because I'm already sold on the story. Like I said, I have thousands of hours across both Pillars of Eternity games. But most people don't. Most people have no idea what they're getting into. So capturing the non-initiated had to be Obsidian's #1 priority, and they really seem to have delivered. There's even a third-person perspective now. It doesn't look amazing, I'd say, and I'm going to be playing the game in first person for sure, but it's nice that they added to it, and maybe they can tweak it a bit and improve it here and there. So, Obsidian, with a limited budget, is doing their best to create an immersive, fun action RPG, and it seems, largely speaking, that they have succeeded at this based on limited impressions. Lots to explore, lots to discover, good RPG mechanics in terms of dialogue. There's crafting. You can craft potions, ointments. You can break down items and then use them later to craft other items. And in similar fashion to Pillars of Eternity, you can upgrade most items by using the right ingredients or crafting materials. So this is definitely going to be a fairly deep RPG, all things considered. Now, based on these impressions I saw, there wasn't too much in terms of lore. There seemed to be some totems and items that are related to the gods. But I think the biggest giveaway in terms of the lore, if you're familiar with the background of Pillars, which I know a lot of people are not, is the fact that you are a godlike. You are limited to playing a human elf godlike. I am 99% sure this was a budget limitation, but the reality of your existence as a godlike is you don't know what kind of godlike you are, which is kind of strange because godlike are always designated by a certain type of appearance or phenotype that is correlated with a particular god. In fact, we know from previous footage, and we know now from these reviews, that basically the godlike have essentially all but disappeared. There are very few left. And if you're familiar with the events of Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire, then you can also surmise as to why this is the case. This game takes place roughly 2 to 3 years after the events of Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire, after what Aothis did. I'm not going to go into details there because I don't want to spoil it further. But I think, ultimately, given the budget limitations, this was a very skillful way of weaving the deep lore, the cosmology, the theology of Eora into the main story, because you're trying to figure out what type of godlike you are. You have no idea why you are the way you are. And the other thing that's been made known is that the reverberations of the consequences of Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire are not yet entirely known. Some people know about it, like Sargonis, that one Aothesian godlike we encounter in an earlier build. He knows about the strange disappearance of the godlike and that something's up when it comes to the gods, especially his own god, obviously. But for the most part, people are still unaware. And I suspect, if I had to guess, that And I strongly suspect, if I had to guess, that a lot of Avowed will be about the world becoming aware and coming to terms with the new status quo with respect to the gods and what happened in the previous two games. And if I had to guess further, I would guess that the Dream Scourge, this magical plague, is also related to divine matters, if I had to guess. So, overall, I think the impression here is quite positive. Like I said, third person doesn't look amazing, and that's a shame, but budget limitations. And I'd say that my biggest concern surrounding Avowed right now has very little to do with the game itself, but because it's shaping up to be pretty cool. Lots of exploration, lots to discover, fairly deep RPG mechanics in terms of dialogue, crafting, and even combat. And yeah, the combat looks noticeably more fun. Everyone's confirmed this, and I'm sure the story is going to be really interesting and intriguing. So at this stage, the price point is really my biggest concern because, again, 70 euros or 90 euros if you're insane enough to get an early access version of it is crazy. Now, obviously, this is a strategy to drive people towards Game Pass, but Avowed is a game that takes place in Eora, and so I would like to own the game and not play it on a flimsy subscription-based platform such as Game Pass, so Game Pass is a pass for me. So that's a problem, and I don't think many people necessarily are going to be driven into the arms of Game Pass just because it's so expensive on Steam or GOG. And this is definitely an issue, as is the fact that Avowed is still being released in a month with a lot of competition. I would say the biggest competition for Avowed is almost certainly Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, which is a different sort of RPG, but there probably is overlap in terms of the player base. And the worst thing is that Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is a much bigger game, a much more thorough game, and it only costs 60 euros as far as I'm aware. So there's another point of competition that's going to drive, unfortunately, in my humble opinion, Avowed into the ground, and that's obviously just not good. But, as I said, in an effort to onboard new players, it seems that Obsidian has succeeded at this, and I think if you're into the Pillars universe, you're probably going to be pretty excited for Avowed. I'm looking forward to it. It's still my #1 pick next year, despite the price. I'm very disappointed about that, and I can't wait to dive back into Eora. And as always, thank you for tuning in. If you like my content and my takes, you can leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe. It's much appreciated. Really helps out the channel. and I'll check you out next time. Take care.